listener production.
Hey, I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Welcome to this episode of The Briefing. We live in a busy, overwhelming and fast-paced world. More than half of the global population resides in urban areas, surrounded by cars and tall buildings, technology and lots of people. So naturally, it's fascinating to see and hear about indigenous tribes that live pretty much the same way now as they did thousands of years ago. We've seen images of communities in far-flung Andaman Islands, in remote pockets of the Amazon and in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. But while these people choose to reject the modern world and exercise their right to live the way they choose, the modern world is increasingly encroaching on their territories and their freedoms. Today we're going to dive deeper into the uncontacted tribes living right now across the globe and find out about the amazing work being done to protect them and ensure their future. Joining me is Fiona Watson, the Director of Research and Advocacy at Survival International, the global movement for Indigenous and tribal people's rights. Fiona, welcome to The Briefing. I think there are a lot of ideas or misconceptions around uncontacted tribes and who they are and how they work. Is the idea that they've never been in touch with anyone outside their community true?
It depends on who you're talking about, because there's actually within uncontacted tribes, there's quite a sort of range. I think it's fair to say that all uncontacted tribes, even the most isolated tribe in the world, who are the Sentinelese, who live on an island in the Andamans, which belongs to India, because they live on an island, they fiercely defend it and reject contact and so in that sense, have no contact at all with anybody. However, they, like all other uncontacted tribes, or most of them, do know about a world out there. And that's for a number of reasons. In parts of the Amazon, particularly on the Peruvian and Brazilian border, 150 years ago, that was the epicenter of the rubber boom. And so what we think happened is that historical memory has sort of been passed down to the uncontacted tribes today. They will know that their ancestors were enslaved and terrible atrocities happened. Many died from disease. Others will have fled and escaped enslavement to work in the rubber forests. So they fled up the headwaters of the Amazon tributaries, which is why most of the uncontacted tribes now are in very remote areas. But it is true to say that they know there's a world out there because they have neighbours, indigenous neighbours. So they might have sporadic contact with them.
It's fascinating, and I think something that the general population the world over is completely blind to. It's such an interesting section of the global community. How many uncontacted tribes are there around the world, and how have we come to know about them?
Yeah, it's quite difficult to answer that because it's only ever a very general estimate. But the latest estimate that Survival has is up to 200. And the very interesting thing is that we're actually discovering or knowing more about them every year. And that's partly because, particularly in the Amazon, as more and more of the Amazon rainforest is penetrated, invaded, cut down, or people are grabbing land, it's really having a devastating impact on the uncontacted tribes. So also through monitoring and sometimes spotting their communal houses from the air, they have a good idea roughly where these people are. So I'd say up to 200 and very widely dispersed. I mean, that's also really interesting. So the vast majority of uncontacted tribes live in the Amazon basin, most of the Amazon countries. They're also in the Andaman Islands, so the Sentinelese, who I mentioned. And they're also uncontacted tribes in Indonesia, on the island of Halmahera, for example, where the Honggana Manyawa are facing very serious problems with mining companies who are going in to build nickel mines ironically, for electric car batteries, because the nickel's used in that. And also in West Papua and Papua New Guinea. So actually it's a very diverse picture, global picture.
Yeah, and close to us here in Australia as well. Papua New Guinea are one of our closest neighbours. So it's so interesting to learn just how widespread it is. I do want to talk about the Mashopiro people in the Amazon. Now, they were the ones that we had photos emerge of last week showing them on this riverbank. Why was it so concerning to see those images?
Yeah, it was extremely worrying because we know there's been a logging concession on part of their land It's been there for some years. And extraordinary though it may seem, the Forest Stewardship Council, which is a body that certifies sustainable timber, has certified this timber as sustainable, even though it's aware that the Mashkopiro use that land. And unfortunately, when their territory was first recognised by the Peruvian government, it didn't include the part where the logging concession is. So seeing them come out in those extraordinary images that we released the other day on this sort of beach on the river, it's the dry season and they often come out to collect turtle eggs and things, was on the one hand, it was great because it showed that they were there and they look extremely healthy. It was interesting that there were no women or children. So that indicates that with just the men being there, although they had put their bows and arrows on the ground, they weren't holding them. So they were it was peaceful. Nevertheless, there could be an underlying fear there about contact coming out onto the beach. But as you say, most importantly, we know that there's one logging concession, a huge logging concession, only kilometres away from where they appeared on the beach. And this is extremely worrying because we know from very recent experience, particularly in Brazil, which has a long history of forcing contact. It doesn't do it now. But the reason they stopped making contact was because it was catastrophic. And often within the first year of contacting a tribe forcibly, up to 90%, anything between 50 and 90% of the tribe could die. That's a catastrophic depopulation. And still today, many of those people who were contacted, say 30, 40, 50 years ago, are still struggling and their population hasn't increased very much. So this question of making forced contact is dangerous because of disease. So uncontacted indigenous peoples who've lived in this very remote area of the Amazon, like the Mashkopiro for so long, have no immunity to diseases like, us. The other concerning thing is the question of a violent encounter, because obviously people like the Mashkopiro are defending their territory. They know that everything depends on it. Their livelihood, their spiritual connection to the land is very deep. Past memory will have told them outsiders are dangerous. They've killed us probably in incidents in the past or transmitted disease. So they don't want anyone there. And a couple of years ago, there was an incident where some loggers came across the Mashkopiro and there was a conflict and one of the loggers died and the other one was seriously injured. So that's another reason for the logging company should get out now. The Peruvian government should enforce this, and the Forest Stewardship Council should revoke the sustainable certification.
Is leaving uncontacted tribes alone enough to ensure their protection?
Well, I think it's very important to respect their right that they have under international law and in many constitutions in South America to decide themselves how they want to live. And that's actually enshrined for all human beings under the UN conventions. So we have to respect that. And they clearly reject contact. There was an iconic photograph of the Sentinelese after the tsunami, whenever it was 15 or 20 years ago. The Indian Coast Guard flew a helicopter over to check that they were okay, and they were. And they saw this helicopter and they fired arrows up. A very clear sign, and there are lots of other signs, we don't want contact. So I think we have to respect that. That is not to say it put them in some kind of zoological theme park, far from it. There will come a time, maybe or maybe not, that they might decide they want contact. But I think it has to be when they're ready and on their terms.
What other work needs to be done now in order to ensure that they have their autonomy and they can live the life that they have chosen to, as long as they decide they want to do that?
Well, I think it's very important that companies, so there's a lot of oil companies, mining companies who are working on uncontacted land, but also there are companies working by the land. So it's extremely important that these companies take on board the fact that they are in an area of an uncontacted tribe and that the land belongs to the uncontacted tribe, and they cannot, for obvious reasons, make contact with them. So therefore they cannot obtain their free, informed and prior consent to any development on their land. I think that's crucial. I also think the public have a vital role to play, just to feel you can do something. For example, with the Mashkopiro, when Survival launched the footage and the video, the photos and the press release, many people, without even being asked to do so, started bombing the social media pages, emailing the Forest Stewardship Council, calling on it to revoke its certification of the logging company on Machu land. That forced them to publicise a statement. Well, survival and indigenous organisations in Peru have been lobbying the Forest Stewardship Council for years. Some of the indigenous organisations even met them last year in person. They have done nothing. They have ignored all requests to revoke the certification. But the global outcry and individuals taking action made a difference.
Yeah, it's such a great message. Fiona Watson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on The Briefing today.
That's a pleasure. Thanks very much.
That was Fiona Watson from Survival International speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is it for now, but the Weekend Briefing is back tomorrow with Antoinette Lattouf. She's got a fascinating chat with Australian comedian, actor, composer, songwriter, pianist and director Tim Minchin. Here's a sneak peek.
I will give you another compliment, Matilda and the music. I listen to it on repeat in my household. Yes, I have two girls who love musicals.
You have an excuse.
I have an excuse, but I listen to it in the car when they're not with me. And Revolting Children, I'm going to say, is just, that's the best song on the. Do you call it a soundtrack? It's a soundtrack.
Yeah, on the movie soundtrack?
Yeah, the movie soundtrack.
Yeah, I agree.
You've previously written songs, Come Home, which is about Cardinal Pell and I Still Call Australia Homophobic. What would your anthem now be for the country or the state of human rights in the world?
I wrote it. I wrote it and it just won the biggest advertising prize on the planet.
That will be in your feed from tomorrow morning. And a reminder, you can actually watch that full chat on YouTube as well. We put all our Weekend Briefing eps up there. Search Listener Newsroom. That's LISTNR. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. We'll catch you next time.
Listener.